Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to a Shenmue Dojo video. Today I wanted to talk about the cut boat chapter, chapter 2. So this takes place between Shenmue 1 and Shenmue 2. So it's the journey from Japan to Hong Kong on the boat. This was cut from the games. You may have come across the comics that were out with the Xbox version of Shenmue 2, which depicts Ryo fighting Chai off to save a little girl on the boat. This is slightly referred to in Shenmue 2 as Ryo is sort of journeying towards the Free Stay Lodge. He's obviously hounded by all the people trying to sell him shit. And then the mother of the girl sort of says to him, look, they're going to try and sell this picture to you. Ignore them. And then thanks him for saving the little girl on the boat or looking after her when she was scared. So what I want to look at a bit here is the story that was going to be told on the boat, some of the sort of the actual gameplay elements of it, because it might have felt slightly different because it's quite an enclosed space, and then talk a little bit what happened to it. And there's a really good interview from our old forums in 2004, which I will show you and talk through shortly. So the story, I've pretty much covered it in the introduction. It's essentially Ryo's travel between Japan and Hong Kong on the boat. On this trip, a little girl is captured by an unknown entity who is later to be revealed as Chai. Now, he has survived his trip into the sea somehow. I don't know how, but he does. And then essentially lures Ryo out to fight him again because he's wanting to please Landy and work for him. Ryo defeats him sort of fairly easily in the comic, it must be said, before saving the little girl. And Chai goes off for another bath in the random sea that he's in. I, again, don't know how he survives this to end up in Shenmue 3. That's not a clue, but he does. And then Ryo goes on his merry way into Hong Kong. That's the basic story of it. So it's quite short is probably the word I would use for it. But how could that have played in a game? So gameplay-wise, I would have expected if this was in the Dreamcast era, it would have been essentially very similar to Shenmue 1 and 2 in terms of the way it's presented, in terms of the gameplay. It'd be that third-person perspective, Ryo would be walking around the boat. It's a very tight, enclosed space, which may have had camera issues. Now, I bring that up just because in Shenmue 2, they went through a little funny camera angle thing in Beverly Hills Wharf, and I don't know why. Whether that could have been a factor on the boat, maybe, I don't know. I'd have anticipated that Ryo would have had some sort of cabin to sleep in, very much like in Shenmue 1, he's got his room. Shenmue 2, he's at various hotels or Ren's hideout. Shenmue 3, you then got Shenhua's house and the Niaowu Hotel, of course. So that element, I imagine, would stay very, very similar to what we know already. In Shenmue lore, the boat trip takes around 20 days. Now, 20 days is quite a long time for any player in terms of Shenmue to work through. So they would probably have to consider, or would have had to consider, how that would have panned out in terms of gameplay. Would they, like, for example, have had day skips, for example, or that Ryo would have completed a small task, and then a few days later he wakes up, does another task, and you sort of speed that along perhaps, because 20 days set is a very long time, and I don't think that would have gone down well with players, quite frankly, because the boat is such a small place. There's going to be a very limited amount of things you could do on it. That said, in terms of things you could do on it, you'd need mini games, so I'd hope, depending on how it's presented, you'd get some sort of mini games like capsule toys, maybe a small arcade. You could have some gambling games if you wanted to. Imagine if it was in Shenmue 2, for example, that could have been the introduction to some of the gambling games. Obviously, in Shenmue 2, you get the introduction to the arm wrestling quite early on, so it could have maybe served that purpose earlier, but that's just sort of an example of it. Within the main story arc, you would, I think, have to flesh it out a little bit. So Ryo would have to have some investigation around maybe some strange occurrences that are going on the boat, maybe strange sightings of like a skinhead by other passengers on the boat, something like that sort of piques Ryo's interest and essentially gets him thinking, but Chai, it could be Chai, but how I elbowed him into the sea. Don't know what happened to him. And then you sort of build it slowly from there over like a few sort of cycles of game days. So I'd probably say maybe 3, 4 at a push. And then you have the big sort of crescendo at the end where Ryo fights Chai, defeats him. And then I think what would be really cool, really, really cool in terms of presentation, is if you could think back to the anime, you have Ryo on the boat coming into Hong Kong. You have sort of the Hong Kong skyline as you're coming in, and he's thinking about his father. That would be a really nice presentation to then lead into the boat docking and the introduction to Shenmue 2 that we got, which is, is quite epic and quite rightly so. So then that's sort of the gameplay elements of it, I guess. What happened to it? Now, this only emerged sort of way back in 2001, and it was talked about in an interview, which was translated on the forums, the old forums, in fact, by Q. And I'm going to bring it up right now for everybody to have a look at, and I'll talk us through it. So this is from 2004. The interview is from 2001, September the 7th, 2001. So it's quite a long time ago. So there's a question in this interview that said that I heard there used to be a chapter 2, the boat between chapter 1, which is Yokosuka, and Shenmue 2. But obviously, as we know, Shenmue 2 begins as Ryo gets off the boat and the mum mentions about the girl being saved. Yu Suzuki's interviewed about this and says yes, the original scenario has sort of disappeared completely. And presumably that's Masaya Matsukaze. He says, yes, that's right. The boat, in fact, Chai reappears. He survived, fights Ryo as an unseen opponent on the boat, and there was a scenario like it. There's a follow-up question saying, what was shot about this? And it sounds like, from reading this, it was essentially done. So they shot it with the intention of it, pretty much being in the game. Yu Suzuki was quite happy with confronting Chai. They'd finished the designs of the boat, including the height of the deck, the length of everything that was pretty much ready, and it was all set to go. And they had some spectacular action scenes that were ready. All the motion capture was done, which is mad. They opened the door of the cabin, and it seemed quite theatrical. So then it sounded like this was going to be some sort of big epic scene or scenes leading into Shenmue 2. The question then is obviously, why is it cut? And he said, quite frankly, it was impossible to get it on, and they just binned it off. So that, it's quite sad, but it is also in keeping with other things in the game as well that have been cut, moved, whatever. There's plenty of things that essentially end up on the cutting room floor. That to say, I would absolutely love in a Shenmue remaster, the DMP project, whatever, if the boat chapter could make an appearance, because we've got the outline of the story there already from the comics, so it could theoretically happen. I was also slightly disappointed it didn't make an appearance in the anime. I understand why, but it would have been cool to have that sort of little nod to it. And yeah, it's again something that was been talked about in Shenmue folklore, like the karate tournament we know about, which is in the anime. It would have been awesome to have had the boat chapter or some reference to it in the anime. They didn't. It is what it is. It's a shame, but we move on from it. Could it have worked? Absolutely. And it sounds like from that interview, it could have been quite an epic sort of build into Hong Kong, and it sort of, looking back at that, having not seen that interview for quite a long time, it makes me a little bit sad that it didn't make it. I don't think it needs to have been too long a segment. I think it should have been very short and sharp, and then sort of build into that lead into Hong Kong. Anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on the boat chapter. What do you guys think about it? Would you like to have played it? What do you think of that interview in terms of what was essentially proposed? Have you seen the comic? And furthermore, would you like to see it in any sort of Shenmue remasters, fan projects, etc.? Guys, drop us a comment below. I might pick some up in a further video going forward. Don't forget to give us a like, share, subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, all of the usual places that you can find us by now. Shenmue Dojo pretty much everywhere these days. And I will be back with a video next week. But for now, guys, take care and have a good one.